Today is a part of our 75th anniversary countdown series. So April 17th, we officially began our countdown to our 75th anniversary here at CMC. And each week we're doing specialized programming related to the college's mission, the college's founding, the college's history. And we are thrilled today to give an update on the Presidential Initiative for Anti-Racism and the Black Experience in America with our Associate Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Civil Rights Officer, Nyree Gray. I mentioned we are recording, so do feel free if you have to step away to view this on the virtual library in a couple of days. And we do hope that you check out all of our programming that we'll have over the coming weeks. Everything from behind the scenes of the Athenaeum to a conversation with Jack and Jill on his 29-year presidency and beyond. It is now my pleasure to turn the reins of the program over to my colleague and friend, Nyree Gray, who has put together 4 incredible committees to review and reflect on this incredible time that we are all living in. We have a committee with alumni, a committee with faculty, a committee with staff, and a committee with students, trying to figure out how CMC can respond at this moment in time and reflect on how to become anti-racist and defeat racism, not only in Claremont, but around the globe. Nyree, the program is yours. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, everyone, for all the logistical support and overall support in doing this program today. Thank you to each of you for attending. I see a few familiar faces. So nice as we're in this conversation together. So I will start off with the PowerPoint, but it will be short-lived. I plan to only go about 20, 30 minutes, and then I'd like to be in full conversation with each of you about what you think. What do you think about the initiative? What do you think about what we're doing thus far? What are other opportunities you think we should be exploring? So this really is one of engagement between us as a community to move the college forward. So on that note, I appreciate your time and contribution, and I will get started. For those of you who haven't been part of my discussions in the past, I welcome you. I start with the framing of what the college is doing at this moment as part of the national conversation around racism, inequality, but also as a product of what's been going on at the college for years. So part of this is building upon efforts that were previously there and taking this opportunity to assess those previous efforts as well. So the President's Initiative comes not just in response to a national moment, although I think that's critically important. As we started last summer, we were in the midst of that moment, whether it was all the conversations across the nation and the election and all those things that have been systemic over time, but also thinking about very clearly what is CMC's role in advancing efforts to end the impacts of racism. And also internally, what are we doing to make sure that we continue along a path of inclusion? So with that in mind, I'll start this and give you kind of an update. The initiative in and of itself was really looking to do a few things, right? There's a fully integrated strategy. And if you go back in time, trust me, I don't want us all to roll back, but if you go back in time to last summer, what we saw was a series of messages from every organization that you can think of, saying things like, we're committed to equality, Black Lives Matter, but we saw a lot of that messaging. And CMC was a place in which we not only wanted to have these messages, but we wanted to have an actual plan in which we were going to implement to move us forward. What we didn't want was this to be just a moment, a window that quickly closes as the news cycle moves forward. But we wanted to think about things that are integral to the framework of the institution so that they would be sustainable over time. So one is just the approach that includes the entire college, student, faculty, staff, alums. The other was an assessment of the college's current efforts and also departmental assessments of, are we doing all we can as an institution to be an place that is inclusive and that people can bring their full identity to this experience. So in those efforts, it is fighting racism. The other is to think about, have we made good progress on our efforts to diversify faculty, staff, and students? And a strong focus on expanding the Black community at CMC, not just in relation to students, but also in relation to faculty, staff, which would generate a more robust alumni presence and connection with those alums maybe that we've lost touch. And we wanted to do this in a manner that reflects our truest intention, which is to be transparent about the work that we do. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we implemented would be things that we can see accountability and making sure they get done, and that we can measure process and progress, and that we can think about the ways that we give that information back to the community. So that's the framework when we talk about the goals of this initiative. As you think about that in large scale, then you have to also reflect on what we need to achieve these goals. And what we wanted was input from everyone. This year was a year of planning as well as trying to commit to action. And we didn't want to just jump on and do the same thing that everybody's done, but we wanted to find a way to get full voice and involvement. We wanted to assess and see within our institution, are there barriers to success? Are there things that maybe we've implemented, but they haven't yielded what we wanted or desired by its implementation? And that the comprehensive plan is in alignment with the overall strategy for the college. So that this isn't something that will be a one-off, but it's also something that meets and is in alignment with the mission and values of CMC, and that we can achieve an integrated framework. Let's talk about what we've done so far. We did develop steering committees for students, staff, faculty, and alum, and they ranged in size from, maybe 10 to 15 members in each committee. The committee's goal was to take this year and really look at the information available to that constituency, look across the college, and see from the perspective of which they represent, are there recommendations that they would make to advance CMC forward in their work against racism. They also want to provide a representative voice for that community, as well as learn about the current structures in place. So for each of these communities, it was a time to educate about what the college is actually doing or has done in the past, to inform about what are the needs of that community that they represent, or what do they see as gaps or opportunities? And then in light of that information, to provide recommendations for the college to move forward. So this is what's taken this amount of time to really reflect and not just start putting things into place without assessing, what have we tried in the past that hasn't worked? What have we tried currently that we're not really yielding the results that we want? And what's the way to move forward? And so we wanted to take the time so that we can transition from this recommendation phase to an implementation phase. Let's talk about the proposals from the students, and I'll share with you what each group has come up with, and then that may guide our conversation about, do we think this is going to move the ball forward? What other things should we be thinking about in addition to these recommendations? And what are ways we can ensure that this will follow through? The students had a very clear understanding of how their experience at CMC, because it was a range of students from very, new students to seniors, from different areas of campus, some athletes, first gen, identify a very diverse group. But they were talking about kind of a common experience at CMC that they saw within their own communities and observed in communities that were different from their own. And they were coming in conversation to talk about ways we can move the ball forward. So the first was one in which I thought about, because I've always considered CMC a welcoming place, but they were saying more welcoming environments for all students from faculty departments. For many years, CMC has been known or defined by econ and gov. And I think you've seen across the board, there has been growth in all departments in terms of faculty size and structure, but less growth in terms of what we would see as diverse learning communities. And so students were feeling that part of why we're not seeing more representation across departments is that not all departments are set to be as welcoming to people from all identities. And a call upon faculty to think about the ways that they can encourage not just someone to be part of that major, although that's ideal, but to engage in the courses that they offer, that the faculty have created a system to be open to all learners, and demanding kind of some understanding of what are the expectations of students at this point who are coming into the college. There was a discussion of more advisor training and an effort to build and fill some of the gaps that students come in with prior to coming to CMC. So there's a general consensus amongst, once I'm a senior, I have very good faculty relationships, I have a very good understanding of what I'm doing. But coming in, especially if I'm from, a first generation background, it is daunting to try to figure out this place. And there's often a disconnect between what the expectation is of the student versus what the faculty at that moment can provide. And so what we were getting was this understanding that students coming in needed help with scheduling, needed an understanding of what they needed in preparation for classes, needed to know what should I take first, second, or third. And faculty were not equipped for that. They were more equipped for, let's talk about the path of your journey through this academic experience. Let's talk about your experiences prior to that can transition you into CMC. Let's talk about the things, my research, things I know well. I can talk about my own department, but I can't, as a faculty member, I'm really not trained to tell you if this is going to substitute for this requirement or not. And so we wanted to make sure that that was part of the experience because that helped remove barriers to success. We wanted to address diversity in faculty for sure, staff, absolutely, key areas as far as whether it's admissions or career counseling, things that are engaging for students coming in and help build that social capital that they may not have. And there was a focus on the lack of a Black presence on campus. And then there was a pull from students to say, we want to be involved in the communications from the college. And they understood there were limitations. They don't individually speak for the college, but they wanted to find a way to make sure that the messaging that was sent out in response specifically to issues of concern nationally represents and reflects a sensitivity to the community upon which is represented at the college. So those are the areas that they were focused on and wanted to see movement on in order to get a better climate for success at CMC. Staff really focused in 3 areas. They wanted to create a staff fellows program, and for years, staff has been an intricate part of the student experience. There's many times, especially since we get students from all over, that it is a staff member who fills that gap for family in a way when they're not at home. And so they wanted to really be clear about having a commitment to staff that they can create capacity building programs across the campus. So in terms of whether it be more professional development, whether it's a better understanding of inequality built amongst staff, a better onboarding for staff as they start with the college so that they can understand the expectations of the space. So that was another area that they wanted to focus on. The other was conference or training as a cohort. I think we've all hit our limit of what we can do online. I'm just being open as someone who's been in Zoom with you for the past year. I think people have hit their limit of online training and training in general, but they were really looking for some opportunities that we can, as a staff community, have a conference around these issues. So it's more of an engagement of a full day dedicated to professional development in a variety of areas. It may be learning about disabilities. It may be learning about how to better support students from other countries, but across the board, there was a desire by staff to gain competency in areas that would remove people feeling isolated in the space and would also further develop their own capabilities in this space. And there was a desire to have a mentorship program with staff. And they said many staff have a lot of student contact by nature, those relationships develop, but they wanted to have a test program that was really a smaller group of staff and students that were focused on transition, how to successfully transition to CMC and what support you may need in order to do so. So those were some of the kind of suggestions coming from staff. When we got to alumni, and the alumni was a very representative group covering many years, from as far back as I would say the 70s, as current as within the last 3 to 5 years. They came up with what I call proposals that will give us better insight as to how we move forward. They wanted a survey of the Black alumni, and there's approximately 800 Black alumni from CMC. It's about 4% of the overall alumni population, but they wanted to survey to see kind of what was the CMC experience, but also to get a gauge of like how we get better connected now and what were the benefits of the institution, what are they doing now in connection with the overall? And so there were efforts to say this survey would not only give us that information, but it would really put CMC out as a thought leader in this space. Lots of schools are doing various things to support, whether it's, funding various programs, but to be at a space where you're being authentically reflective about a community that you're concerned about as a product of your own institution is something that really could be a publishable product at the end. They wanted to create more programming, of course, that attracts a diverse group of alums, and we offer a variety of programming. And so I think the effort to combine with the current structures and think about what other ways, and you've seen this a lot if you've been following the events at the Athenaeum, especially since we've been online. There is a variety of diverse speakers that come to the Athenaeum, and we want to try to make sure that is reflected in the programming to get a wider audience into the space. And they also wanted to have programs that were more connections with alumni throughout the recruitment process. So I think we do fine in terms of getting people interested. We admit a very diverse group, but we don't always yield the students and matriculate them here in the way that we admit. And so trying to use alumni in that interactive space to gather more connection and a better yield throughout the process. So that was that. And then with faculty. So faculty, of course, have, like all the other constituencies, been working on this gradually over time. The focus of this steering committee, I think, were to move a lot of those programs in a space of being actually deliverable versus just contemplated. So I'll talk through a bit of those and make sure we have a chance to kind of digest this. One was course innovation grants, and they were grants given to encourage faculty to either design a new course or redesign a current course to include aspects of more perspectives and more avenues to address inequality within the curriculum. So whether it's a focus of including more authors, including more content, changing the engagement to actually reflect the impact of racism on that topic. But there were just innovation grants to get more of an education in the space. The faculty also engaged, and 15 faculty were selected to participate in this program. And these are faculty who have put forward projects that will build capacity across the college to work against racism. And so they vary. They vary from assistance in training on how to do equitable search processes for hire. It is how to communicate and advance issues in indigenous communities across the board, how to connect students with community partners to make sure that they're getting not just the bubble of this academic experience, but working external with real people who are out in the world doing this work now. So it's a variety, and from across several departments, from Gov to literature to history, that people have come into this space to build capacity so that they could be a resource for other faculty, but also promote a variety of projects. And so as we share out, you're going to get to see the benefit of some of those projects. They would love to have a scholar in residence program and are developing the parameters around that. These are just ways to integrate more diversity in front of students and interacting with the faculty. We're not always going to get to hire additional tenure and tenure track positions, but even in the interim of not being able to do so, getting really well-known scholars to come into the space and educate and contribute could be very meaningful. Independent of the committee, we had 2 faculty who proposed a general education requirement in more racial, cultural understanding. And so the committee did a lot of work in kind of vetting that through and making sure we gain a lot of faculty input. This is very much still in process and design. So this is kind of saying, what courses do we already offer that would satisfy something like this, that build capacity across departments and introduce students to concepts of racial understanding, ethnic and cultural understanding. Nationally, you're starting to see a lot more of these requirements. Many colleges, I can think of Berkeley, have had them for years, but it's just a way to make sure that as we're preparing the next group of leaders that leave CMC into the profession and that are going to be global leaders, that they've actually engaged and studied and understood the significance of diverse communities and building talent within diverse communities. And there was a big focus on hiring, just getting more information out and different colleagues collectively thinking about how do we add to our own community, whether it's through visitors. We'll have a postdoc in religious studies in the fall. We'll have another tenure gov hire and chemistry hire. So there's tenure and tenure track opportunities. And we'll be hiring in additional departments for next year. So that's been where the faculty have been, their focus throughout this and their recommendations. So the other things that are going on in terms of, we haven't just spent this whole year planning. Throughout this, we've also been implementing as the year has gone on. You've seen a lot of the dialogue groups, the speaker series, the book clubs. We've done all of those across the board, whether they've been faculty specific or large group discussions. There's been a tremendous amount of commitment of resources to making sure we have good hiring practices and search committee training, et cetera. And we've done quite a few searches this year, so that's been implemented. And a ton of work around the curriculum and really re-examining the curriculum. This is also an opportunity for us to look at our current Gs and see if they still meet the needs that were in place when they were first instituted. And so an overall examination across the college has been part of the focus of what's going on currently. So as I wrap up, I want to share a few things before we get into our discussion. If you ever want to get involved at all, or you have ideas, or you've read things that worked at other places, or you even have concerns, you can always email me at ngray, Gray, @cmc.edu. I'm happy to take any initiative advice or suggestions or questions that you may have. What are next steps now that the committees have met and made these recommendations? They are forwarded to our kind of institutional diversity committee to make sure that we've set up parameters for measurements and be able to report out on progress, and also the implementation of these actual ideas and concepts. So that's the next step. And now I will be open for questions. So I'm going to stop share and get some feedback on what I've shared, get your thoughts, and kind of listen from your perspective what you'd like to see in addition to what I've shared. Thanks.
Thanks, Nyree, and thanks for all of your incredible work here. I know it's been quite the undertaking, so thank you from all of us. And I'm having some technical issues, so occasionally Jenna may be asking the questions, so do feel free to chat publicly in the chat with any questions, or to me or to Jenna Goff directly. So we did have a question come in advance about the general education requirement, and you touched on that a little bit in your conversation. What does that process look like? I mean, there's been a lot of conversation to other institutions for the GE requirement.
Sure.
So where does that kind of land? How long does it take? What does it look like? Any comments there I think would be appreciated.
Sure, and all good comments. The process in and of itself starts with the proposal. And the proposal is created by Gaston Espinoza and Dan Levesey. And they came to the curriculum committee is the first stop. And the curriculum committee will review a proposal and see if there are any concerns before it's moved forward to faculty. And this is just for discussion at that point. We don't go always from like proposal to vote immediately because you want to get a consensus from the group. So initially the proposal came out, went through curriculum supported proposal for the purpose of us kind of educating in the space, went to full faculty, and full faculty had a lot of questions. So from that point, we looked at the proposal and started to workshop the proposal, some of which you guys participated in. So we had a forum with students, so students could give their feedback of like, how does this feel to have a proposal? How does it make sense in light of all the other requirements we have? How will it be, is it one course that everybody has to take? Is it a bunch of courses? And the proposal is an overlay requirement. And what's meant by that is it's not like Econ 50. It's not like everyone has to take this one course. It's open across the curriculum, that there's several different courses in each department that would satisfy this cultural understanding requirement, and that people could take that course and have it satisfy more than one thing. So it may be your history requirement and satisfy this cultural understanding requirement. So the goal in laying it as an overlay course is to make sure that it doesn't overburden a student who may feel like we already have so many, why would I need an extra? And also provide opportunities for students to take courses, whether it's within their own major or in other departments for, just general expansive knowledge on it that would be able to satisfy this. So it's not limited in one course. The other part was getting faculty together to think about how does this impact what they're currently doing? Like, is it one in which this is a whole new creation of a course for every faculty? Or is it something that we've already been offering quite a few courses in this area? So some of our courses right now would satisfy that requirement. We work through the registrar and for currently for any requirement, we have to have about 25 to 30 courses that are offered each semester in order to support whatever the requirement is. And so at this point, we've given the general parameters of the proposal and discussed it with the academic affairs side of the Board of Trustees, so they could kind of think about it in terms of what they would want to see in this type of proposal. How does this further not just this one objective, but the overall what we think students need to graduate objective? And what's happening most recently is that we've sent a call out to all faculty and departments to submit courses that they think would satisfy this requirement. So we have a committee that would vet to make sure that this is going to meet those needs. And we've had great response from all the departments across the board. So that's where it is right now. When I think about a timeline, I wouldn't anticipate a vote like this semester. I think we would pick it back up in fall. Now, once we have a sense of these are the actual courses that could fulfill the requirement, because I think that's important information for the faculty to know before anybody would consider voting. And then also it gives us time to look at how this is in alignment and covers maybe some of the gaps in our current Gs. So it gives us time to review the Gs in light of this new proposal. So that's about where it is right now. I think it's one of those that we want to make sure that we are thoughtfully going through it. And it's not the first time that it's come up. I think that's important too. We want to make sure that people don't think this is a knee-jerk reaction in light of current events. I've been at the college now, it'll be 7 years in October, and every semester, this is the consistent question I get asked is, why don't we have a GE in this? When I talk to recent alums, the one thing they say they would have benefited from is, I can't believe I got through CMC the whole way without taking any course on learning the cultures of other people. And so across the board, this has been an ongoing discussion. So I want to frame it correctly and not make it think like the initiative, ignited this. But I think it just gave us a moment to actually put a process through. It's been lots of conversation about it, I would say at least over the past 7 years since I've been here.
Wonderful, thanks, Nyree. Hillary from Chicago has a follow-up to this, and she asked if the GE requirement that we're considering is modeled after Georgetown's requirement. Are you aware of Georgetown's at all? Or?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's modeled after. I think there's quite a few schools who have a similar requirement. So I think the structure of it may be similar to Georgetown's. I actually think Georgetown's is a bit more kind of broader, diversity focused than I think ours is currently. Many of colleges have taken a broader, whether it's like an American studies type of requirement or a diversity or a class on difference. If I looked at Pomona's class is on difference, and I think Georgetown is a little broader. The focus on this requirement is specifically a racial and cultural understanding, out of concern that oftentimes when you do too broad a requirement, it allows lots of things to fit, but not really meet a goal. And I think the concern also is nationally, oftentimes people will avoid race as a preference for something they may feel more comfortable with, gender, right? So in turn, it was really a more narrowed focus that would allow for a deeper analysis in one aspect. So that's the only distinction I would say, but both are trying to meet a goal of making sure students are introduced to the concepts of difference in a high academic level. That's the alignment I would say with both.
Thank you, Nyree. A question came in from Allison in the Bay Area about the kind of some of the co-teaching that goes on. We had a conversation with John Shields and Phil Zuckerman. Any possibility to use those co-teaching elements in this sphere as well?
Absolutely. And I think what's nice, especially about John's class, and full disclosure, I'm a fan of John. I think what happens in those moments when we can team teach or co-teach a course is that you get an interesting dynamic amongst the perspectives on that issue. So even for those that we haven't said are exactly team taught, all of the courses are looking for areas in which they can bring in, even if it's short term, some other speaker or some other voice to kind of give different conceptual ideas to that particular topic. So the way that the structure of this GE is proposed in its current form, it very much aligns with what we're trying to do with the initiative, and also equally supports our commitment to Open Academy, which I think is significant in the way that we've structured our own GEs. But yeah, the team teaching part is definitely a component. And even if we can't get full faculty for the full semester, looking for ways in which we can integrate a variety of perspectives throughout, which has become really convenient with Zoom. Even when we go back in person, I have a lot of faculty who are still keeping this component to keep access to people that they couldn't get traditionally, is still part of it. So excellent question, and absolutely.
We had a question come in about just curious about some numbers. You mentioned 800 alumni who are Black, and CMCers love data. So anything else you can share about maybe the number of students currently enrolled, or the number of faculty who are Black? Any tidbits would be helpful.
Sure. So let's go with the numbers that we can talk about, and hopefully they'll demonstrate for you the need for such support growth. When I first started at CMC, we had one Black faculty member, professor in French. And that was the way it remained for, I would say, approximately 3 years. Now, I would love to be like, and we've increased it by 300%, right? But the numbers are so low that, thank you. The numbers to go from 1 to 4 are dramatic in percentage, but not in the variable of the number. So currently, I would say we have 4 Black faculty, but overall, that's such a low number in terms of our overall faculty, which is in excess of 160. So we still have a lot of hiring work. And I can clearly say with that number, I can't say that we have every department who has a Black faculty member. I would say we probably have more departments that don't than do. And that's just one. As far as entering classes, currently, usually the range of, and I'm just talking the African-American numbers, I can go through other percentages and provide slides later. The enrollment of first-year enrollment for African-American students ranges somewhere, I would say, between 13 and 15 per class. And entering class is usually between 330, 340. We may get up to 350 this year. I'm looking for that number to increase this year. There's been a tremendous amount of work in athletics that I think towards diversity recruitment that's going to be very impactful. And overall in the coaching and the staff, I think the work that CMS has done will have a tremendous impact, as well as the work that admissions continues to do. So I anticipate the numbers will grow as they've grown the past couple of years. But overall, consistently since I've been here, there hasn't been a point in which I've had more than 100 Black students at the school at any one time. Usually, with each year, I'm somewhere between maybe 60, 75 Black students enrolled. And when you think about the current enrollment of CMC usually being about 1,250, it doesn't provide a space for people really to feel community. Now, if I looked across the board, do we have an increase in Asian students? Sure. Do we have an increase in Latino students? Sure. But it's still numerically small, right? Like even if I went to 14% that identify as Latin in some way, when we're looking across an entire campus, you really need to have more in order to build a significant amount of community. Where I think we've made some strides, and I want to be very clear, I think we've made strides across the board, but in areas on the low income Pell Grant side, I think we've actually made quite a bit in that area in terms of strides. I think when I first came in, it may have been like 10%. We're now pushing closer to 20% that identify as Pell Grant eligible. In order to do so, to be Pell Grant eligible, you have to be in the bottom 20% of income nationally to qualify. So I would say we've made really great strides in terms of financial and also in first generation students overall, across all demographic, racial, but definitely an increase in first gen students. So I think in those two areas, we've made some strides, and it all comes as sort of, the things that you measure get done, the things that you pay attention to over time will continue to happen. So I do think we've made strides in some areas, and some areas we still need to do quite a bit of work. So I at least want to note those as well.
Following up on that, and then we'll go to Harriet, who has a couple of questions. How do our student of color numbers that we enroll at CMC, how is that reflected on other institutions? Are we similar? Are we behind? Where are we in the national standing, especially with other maybe top 10 liberal arts colleges?
Sure. And I will say that the enrollment of our diverse class is a national struggle with liberal arts colleges. I would say our enrollment in African American is slightly lower. Usually I've seen some other schools at least get somewhere closer to 6 or 7%. And we're talking bodies here, but I do think we could do better there. We are inconsistent in terms of faculty. I do think that, yes, absolutely, it's a struggle to get a diverse faculty. I do think there's a lot of growth that we can make that. If I looked at our national peers, even in the area of gender, we are about 68-32 male versus female in our faculty as represented. And so as I look at that, people are really pushing closer towards that 50-50 dynamic, maybe not quite there, but definitely not as out of sync on a gender balance as we are. So those are the areas that I think we're lacking some consistency, even with our peers. But absolutely, I think the struggle nationally for liberal arts colleges, not only due to size, but also expense, has made it a challenge to diversify. But I definitely think if I compared our growth over the last 5 to 6 years as compared to what Pomona's done in the last 5 to 6 years, I think the gap has been more significant in terms of just the ability to diversify on a scale. But I also acknowledge that's a larger scale. They're just a bigger school, so maybe that also adds to it. We don't admit a lot of people, period. And that makes every effort we make that much more significant.
And speaking on the admission side, someone earlier asked about the matriculation, or what I call the yields. How are our yields, which means those that we admit and then enroll, how does that look for our African American students? And how does that compare to either other groups at CMC or nationwide?
Sure. I definitely think, and that's why I say if we could actually admit a class closer, if we could yield the class closer to we admit, then we'd be a much more diverse place. So I think we lose traction, especially for African American and African students, in large number when it gets down to the yield. So I would say we probably admit easily 2, maybe close to 3 times as many than actually show up in the fall. And there's a few reasons for that, right? I think if we looked at the population in and of itself, it's a little bit about potentially the manner in which we recruit and who shows up. I have to say that the impact of having a diverse faculty is significant. I think over the last year, if I talk to, and this isn't just Black families, as I talk to white families, they're also asking like, what's up in terms of like wanting to have faculty reflect and prepare them for an experience post-college. I think we're always going to have to address that issue until we can make some gains in the diversity of our faculty. I think the other part too is that, and it's been growing over time, when I first started, it was a lot more so than now, but now we're almost at 50-50 public and private. That will make a difference over time. I would say we had probably really outnumbered the enrollment from private schools, small schools, high schools. That is becoming, I would say in the last, 2 years, we're about 48% public, which will make a change in demographics over time. So I think that's impactful. If I thought about the schools that we lose students to, and this is not just for African Americans, this is for across the board. If you don't come here, you're usually making a big school choice. And so, they are going to a Stanford. They are going to usually some other big places and also, some Ivy League choices. So we don't admit that many, and the people that we do admit have a lot of competition for what we do. But I think the biggest one is it's a difference of, can I see myself at this school being successful, or will I continue a path of being one of? And some people are not looking for that experience to be duplicated. So I think it's something that we'll have to continue to work on. But yeah, we do admit an actually larger number than actually shows up in the fall.
Harriet has posed a few questions in the chat. Harriet, if you would like to ask one or both of your questions, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. I do just want to affirm the curricular efforts and the gen ed curricular efforts. My own daughter was admitted and was oh so close, thought I had such a beautiful spot there. Lorraine and I, she's heard about it for years, right? That, you know, being from Claremont. But when she looked at the faculty and the curriculum in English and creative writing, she just wasn't at all convinced that she would even come close to having the breadth of educational experience that she was looking for. And I couldn't disagree. I do want to maybe have us think a little, I'll skip the data question. You did talk a little bit about outcomes, but I would love to see the dashboard that was mentioned as one of the objectives, start to come to life. But I do want to think, maybe just wonder out loud for just a minute on swinging for the fences. You know, we've heard a number of, thought leaders across the country, especially over this past year, talk about the missing millions of, whether it's women and URM students in STEM or whatever is your view. I mean, that's usually where my view is, right? But the missing millions, right? The people that don't have the opportunity to study X, right? And so I guess I would say, what portion of that is CMCs, right? And maybe as a way to situate the obligation, and then to think about how to find them and intentionally recruit them and support them in being successful at Claremont, right? Because the people that you just, like my daughter, get to go from USC to Claremont or somewhere else, that's great, but that's not where I think the duty lies, the real broader duty lies. And so I would want us to maybe think about how to find CMC's proportion of those missing million students. And then with that, perhaps there might be a signature effort of some sort to build a roadmap for those Black students and their mentors, right? What would that roadmap mean? And probably are going to have to start back a little sooner than freshmen in college, right? I won't necessarily say K-12, but what would that roadmap look like for identifying those students, meeting where there is needs, whether that's in coding or technology or community service or building tiny houses or whatever it is, right? That would bring students who would not have otherwise been in the liberal arts field at all, right? If I'm saying from the anti-racist breakdown of those responsibilities, not just a shift in the current population of those students. So I hope some of those, top of mind musings might make some sense.
Yeah, I mean, as we're doing this initiative, I will say, Hiram and I are both working on what is the national conversation to end racism, and how is this national conversation a broader conversation than CMC? Like, how is this a high school representation, education, healthcare education that gets us all on the same page, which I think will channel to more of the pipeline work that needs to happen for this on this back end. Because if we're just waiting for applicants to show, we're kind of late in that game. So I agree with you, Harriet. I think the other conversations independent of the initiative are how to get thought leaders together from all sectors to think about what is the intervention that needs to happen earlier than this to prepare for us even to be the option later on. You're absolutely right. I think that's why for the students who do come here, many of them are what I would call like big city people. Like they've come from the Chicagos, the New Yorks, the places that are in big rotation of people of color. I still think we miss out on communities of people that are not in those big city places. And those are still prime for opportunities for us to look into. So I am totally in alignment with that. It is not only a compliment, but integral to the success of what we're trying to do long-term.
Thanks, Nyree, and thanks, Harriet. Harriet serves on the alumni committee, so thanks for your time, and the board of trustees. Thank you so much, Harriet. Some very lively conversations in the chat. Nyree, I'll share it with you later. I'll save it and share it with you.
Thank you. Save it.
But one of them is about public versus private schools in secondary education. Maybe how is that affecting the students we're recruiting? So Hillary, who was in admission in DC and Chicago, and me, who was in admission at CMC back in the day, are kind of reflecting on, you know, the regionality of recruitment. So West Coast, we pull a lot of public schools, but outside of the West Coast and Denver, probably, we start seeing a lot of private schools. So how, in your experience, how is that public-private divide in high school helping or discouraging or hurting recruitment?
So I want to share it in ways that are general things that I've seen in trends, but I don't mean for it to be demographic generalities about that particular experience. So overall, when I think about, and I'll narrow it first to a student experience of either first gen or underrepresented students, I'm usually getting one of two things. Either it's the student who was part of a program that got them into a boarding school, that got them into this special school that allowed for them to be tracked in a certain way. That wasn't their neighborhood school, but they got involved in some other program, Chicago Scholars, or, you know, other things that gave them this access to a more elite high school level. So for them, coming to CMC is really a continuation of a high school experience. They've been one of few for a very long time. They've maneuvered that space somewhat successfully, and that they're coming as like, it's not gonna be a huge transition. The other is the public school kid who went to a very big school that mostly was of an identity of their own. This happens a lot with Latino communities as well. They went to predominantly communities of color were at their high school in very large number, and they excelled. But then coming here is an even harder transition socially. It often isn't an academic preparation issue. It is a lack of knowledge of the things that people who went to other schools already had. So I consider it more of like a hidden curriculum issue. There's a way that when you have access to different resources, they've already explained this curriculum to you. So when you come in, it has nothing to do about capabilities. It's just all about, you already know the system. If you didn't go to a school that did that, then you spend your first year trying to learn a system. And by the time you figure it out, it's come at great expense to you personally. So when I say the difference between publics and privates, oftentimes it's not really the distinction of the classification as much of the resources that went into that pre-college experience. Those who are better resourced tend to transition and come in at a much easier rate than those who didn't have that as part of their background. This is even interweaving with, if I've come as the first in my family to do this thing, right? So if I take out my high school, but then I add on, I'm also the first to do this, then there's a bunch of things that you're even more concerned about because they just weren't part of family at home who's going to explain how this goes, right? Like they're just not part of that conversation. So you're learning a lot of this on your own. You're learning financial aid on your own. You're learning all these systems of registration and what qualifies for what, all on your own. And so I think the difference is, one, our ability to support students from various backgrounds, and two, our attractiveness to students, depending on whether it's public or private. And I'm just speaking as a person who went to Berkeley, mostly because it was like, I knew that, like I'd heard of that. it was a name I knew. It was a big place. I didn't live far from CMC, didn't know CMC existed, right? Like it was just one of those odd things that happened, right? Would I have benefited from a liberal arts education? Probably. Do I think my high school was equipped to make the distinctions between? I don't think so. I went to school in a very decent area, but it was really more of like, it wasn't the communication. So I think what's happened over years is CMC has a good relationship with certain places that continue to produce great students, and the counselors are familiar with CMC. And so when you see the dynamics of those strategies at play, I think that's how we end up with these certain populations, that we have a strong contingent from, you know, Washington and Oregon, that we have strong contingents from these different pockets. That when I first came in, I was curious as to what we were doing in China and India. Like we were like off the rockets there, but it was very much centralized and focused in these key areas. So to get to your point in the distinctions between public and private, I think it leads to trends in preparation that I've seen over time, that either CMC has to decide that we're going to be equipped to address for all students universally, like just equipped to say this is part of the way that we do business, or that we have to make clear distinctions about where we are recruiting in order to make sure we're getting people who are going to be successful here, because we've been equipped as an institution to facilitate that success. And so those are kind of the distinctions that I see from a resource standard of public and private, because it makes a difference. I totally agree with Candace's comment. I've benefited a lot from friends. I've benefited a lot from white friends, quite frankly. I think I was lucky enough to get in honors classes, and white friends were generous. And I'm a product of generous white people. I totally agree with that. I think those who are first gen, we rely on the parents of other people that have gone to college. Like that's part of it. I think that's why we're trying so hard now to do the parent relationships with new families coming in. I think that's going to be a big generation, like a big getter for us. If I can get more of our CMC parents who are already so like engaged and interested to connect with some of our first gen families, I think that's going to be a real change for us as a college.
I would love to interject that some of my best friends now are some of the white people I could say, hey, can you explain this to me for a second? Thank
Absolutely.
you. Okay, let's keep going.
No, I think that's why the conversation must be broad. That's why we all have to be part of the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Candace. Good to see you, classmate. We're running out of time. Last question. And I'm sorry, I know I've missed a number of other questions that have been in the chat, but I know Nyree is always open to further conversation and emails. And will, of course, Nyree, if you're willing, we'll have you back at some point for another update. Jay from Chicago has two questions. The first is, what is your biggest accomplishment since joining the college? And the second is, what is the biggest issue going forward? So two small ones. You have three minutes. Go. No.
3 minutes, two small ones. My biggest accomplishment, you know, listen, I'm very proud of the work I've done. Overall, I'm extremely proud of the college. I'm not saying that we get it right 100% of the time, but I will say it doesn't come from lack of effort. I think we really have tried to make gains in this space and have very good intentions. So I think the thing that I'm most proud of is going to sound a little silly to some, is the fact that I've been able to be an associate vice president of diversity and inclusion. When I was recruited for this job, I was recruited into a Title IX Chief Civil Rights Officer role. And I knew coming into it what it meant to be a Chief Civil Rights Officer, which is I am doing what the law requires me to do. And I think diversity and inclusion is definitely a choice. So I'm really proud of the fact that we've moved in a direction that by choice, we're even doing this initiative. I think had you asked me day one, could I even send out a message that says, we're gonna do all this work on anti-racism? I don't think so. I think it took us a while to get to this point, and I'm very proud of that. What am I moving forward? And we're at a moment where like either you make progress or you don't. Like if you're not gonna make progress now, you're not going to make progress. And I think I'm very proud of the efforts we've made, but I think we've hit like a very defining moment at 75 years of the college as a place that started off as a men's college and has transitioned to this with what we are today. I think we're at this moment where people are like, we've done what CMC does, which is plan for every alternative possible and deliver the best thing that we can put forward with the best information out there. So I think in this space, we are very much looking, I think the community is looking to see how CMC is going to deliver on this. And I think in many ways we are, in ways that people are confident that we're on the right track. But I still feel like if we can't make really strong movements in diversifying faculty and really making movements about, you know, how we support first-gen students, low-income students, students of color, I think to exactly what Hillary was talking about, I think we will start to look unattractive to people. As they look at us externally, we will start to look unattractive as a place to come. And that's a concern. I mean, when you're admitting, you know, about 10%, you have some cushion, right? Like you got a group waiting. But I think when you're looking for the most talented people across nationally that are the thought leaders of the future, you want to be attractive to the biggest, broadest population possible to yield that type of talent. And so it's imperative that we make these transitions at this point. So that's my response to kind of what I'm looking forward towards the future. But Evan, I thank you for these minutes. I thank each of you for engaging. Any ideas, always contact me, and I look forward to our next conversation. And thank you to my committee members who are here. I'm seeing a few of them. So thank you for those who have worked with me over this last few months together. Your efforts have been deeply appreciated. So thank you.
Great. Nyree, thank you so much as always.
Always.
It's a pleasure to see you and wonderful to have you, and thanks for all the great work that you're doing. And to all of you, thanks for your time. Thanks for spending the hour with us. We hope to see you at our programming next week. Feel free to unmute, say hello, say goodbye. Thank Nyree, and we'll see you all soon. Bye, everybody.